Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Chan Center. My name is Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, or Aki-Kwe, and I'm the Academic Director of the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center. I want to just recognize that we're gathered here to acknowledge and begin a week that is a very solemn and significant week. And many of you are wearing your orange shirts, which I'm really pleased to see. The event today is presented by the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center at UBC, but in partnership with the UBC Learning Circle, the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health, the First Nations House of Learning, and of course the Chan Center. So I want to acknowledge and thank everyone for joining us in preparing this event for today, and thank staff and others. The most important element of today is to have a chance to hear from a pretty incredible person who has been almost like a guide in Canada between understanding the experience of residential school survivors and public education, and that's Phyllis Webstad. We're so honored to have Phyllis with us today. She's the founder and ambassador of the Orange Shirt Day, and we're going to have a chance to see the newly released film, Returning Home, which really tells these two stories, the stories of survivors and former students of the residential school, and as well the decline of the Pacific salmon. And I'm especially honored today that we have the film director, Sean Stiller, here, who's also a member of the Williams Lake First Nation, and some of his family members here, his mom, his uncle, and others. Really super grateful to have him as well. And he may share a few words about the film as well after we see it. So I wanted to just open the event today to say Orange Shirt Day is a very significant day for all Canadians, and thanks to Phyllis Webstad. And if any of you are fans of the BC Lions, you would have seen Phyllis was with the BC Lions this past week, and some 10,000 fans, as well as hundreds of thousands of viewers, with Cookbee Roseanne Casimir from Tk'emlúps and Minister Melanie Mark and others to basically light up the BC Lions orange. So much gratitude to Phyllis for doing that and for bringing proper awareness and understanding of the Indian residential school system, its impact, not only historical but continuing. And wearing orange is something that you'll hear more about why it's significant to stand in solidarity. But of course, here at UBC, it's very important to acknowledge the role of the University of British Columbia in the residential school system, not only through educating teachers who were in the system or those who worked in the Indian hospitals that ran adjacent to them, but the important role of decolonizing, not only in British Columbia, but in Canada, and also holding accountable places like the University of British Columbia for its role. And of course, 4 years ago, President Sanaono offered an apology to survivors and made a commitment that the University of British Columbia would engage in that reconciliation journey by decolonizing. And it's an ongoing journey. And I really want to stand up and recognize all of the Indigenous faculty and Indigenous staff, Indigenous students that are part of that, and also recognize today that during this week, there can be a lot of cultural loading on Indigenous people to explain. And I know as I got my son, who's in high school, off to school this morning, he kept changing from orange shirt to button to orange shirt, and he's like, why do I have to explain about my 3 grandparents that went to residential school? It's too much pressure. I can't do that in 5 minutes. I'm like, well, don't do that, son. This isn't about you having to explain. This is about opening up a space for understanding and for learning and to share it. But there are those people who have really kicked down that door to allow us to have a culturally safe and informed space to do this. And I use the word culturally safe because I'm so grateful today that we have with us wellness supports from the Indian Residential School Survivor Society, as well as quite apart from today during this week for First Nations people in particular. We have the supports in British Columbia from the First Nations Health Authority, Those resources, you'll see some on the screen, but you'll also see some on the website of the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center. And we have the support of the Indian Residential School Survivor Society. So we have mental health supports. If they're needed, certainly don't hesitate to use them. I know it's very hard, again, just speaking of my own family, since the pandemic lifted, one of my kids went back to school in Montreal. She won't be with me for Orange Shirt Day and the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Others are in different places. And so if you're a student here at UBC and you're feeling particularly alone and missing your family, there are other activities that you can participate in. There are supports. And certainly we want to support students, faculty, and staff at UBC during this time. And we want to make sure that we can share the burden with them of explaining how important this day is, but also explaining that it's about more than one day. So really pleased to be gathered here and being able to go deeper into some of the important issues that we're carrying about this. And it's a very strong term, but it's a term that we're not afraid to use at the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center, which is we do feel very strongly that there needs to be full and complete accountability and truth with respect to the residential school history. And that truth only comes when survivors are treated respectfully and heard. And the testimony and the knowledge of the survivors needs to be appropriately protected and stewarded. And I was talking to one of our speakers before about the difficult situation we had with forest fires this summer, where horrible fires happened. And even some of the old tapes and materials of the survivor stories and so forth were lost. And how important it is at a place like UBC for us to bring our digital infrastructure, our resources, our expertise to make sure that communities in British Columbia, First Nations communities, like those 21 communities with schools, that they have the support required to document, to record, to ensure that the full story that survivors want to record, or those with living memory. In some instances, survivors have gone on, but sons, daughters, grandchildren have the living memory from the stories. So it's very important to record that, to understand it, and to hear it. And as I said, at the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center, we're not afraid to use the appropriate terminology. And that's human rights terminology, because the residential school system wasn't an education system. That's very significant, and you're going to hear a bit more about that from a very special speaker in a minute. The residential school system was designed with genocidal intent to take the Indian out of the child. And that is something for which full and complete accountability must be obtained. And the types of massive human rights violations that went along with it, we're still recovering, we're still addressing it, we're still unpackaging it. And so at UBC in particular, at the center, we stand in support of survivors. We also stand in support of full access to records about the schools so that survivors can have, and their communities can have what they need to be able to fully document that story. So that's a little bit of information about the center, and much gratitude to the center staff that are here. The UBC Center, Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center, is open. Obviously today may not be very busy for all of you, but do have some time to come to the center, particularly if you're a UBC student, a new student over the last few years and hasn't been here. You're more than welcome to come. We'd like to welcome you, and we'd like to share with you whatever resources we have at the center. I also want to make sure that when I'm talking about the role of the residential school system in education, that it's not about education. But it's so central that educators from every level, K, kindergarten, preschool, all the way through to post-secondary, have good education material and have accurate information about residential schools. That's critical. And I think it's really important to acknowledge, in particular, the next speaker that I'm going to invite up, Dr. Joanne Archibald, or Xiiem, who's a member of the Stalo Nation, and she has been a lifelong advocate and leading voice for the advancement of Indigenous education, both within Canada and globally. She's an emeritus professor at UBC Department of Educational Studies, and she was the former Associate Dean for the Indigenous Education and Director of the ITEP, or Indian Teacher Education Program, and former Director of the First Nations House of Learning. Xiiem is going to give you some remarks today because she has such a heartfelt connection. Her entire professional life was dedicated to creating not just a safe space in education for Indigenous people, but ensuring that we could resist the narratives that were part of residential school, the doctrine of discovery, the idea that Indigenous people were less worthy, the idea that somehow education had to be tied to something that would improve or take away something from Indigenous people, as opposed to honor and lift up Indigenous knowledge and celebrate Indigenous culture, identity, and learning. Xiiem has created something called the Indigenous Story Work, which is a framework for educators to work with Indigenous stories based on years of research with elders. And again, I really want to stand up and acknowledge these absolute titans in Indigenous leadership at UBC. This is very important to recognize today. We get to come together. There were times, before the last few years, where there was very little acknowledgement of the importance of Indigenous leadership and thought leadership at UBC, and more generally in the field of education. So Xiiem has received many important awards, including she's an officer of the Order of Canada. She received the Inspire Award, which is the highest level of achievement, an Aboriginal Achievement Award granted by Indigenous people. She's also the recipient of the American Education Research Association Scholar of Color Distinguished Career Contribution Award. She serves as well, and I'm so grateful for this, in her public service. I would say also, Xiiem, you're sort of failing at retirement because that's not going very well. You're working harder than ever. She also works as an advisor on the Indigenous Advisory Committee to the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center at UBC. We're so grateful for that. So I'd like to, before we get into the film and we hear from Phyllis, Xiiem will be introducing Phyllis. I'd like to have Dr. Archibald come and share some stories about her life and her work, and to have you, along with me, acknowledge her. Thank you.
Good. Well, hey, Swayel, good day. Thank you for that warm introduction, Mary Ellen, and thanks to the Musqueam for welcoming us to the traditional unceded lands of the Musqueam people of the Rivergrass. I am honored to share some opening thoughts on this remarkable occasion. Orange Shirt Day and the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, set for September 30th, reinforces the power of personal, true stories. The courage to speak up and out about injustice, especially the detrimental legacy of the Indian residential schools, and encourages concerted individual and collective actions to make things better. In Stalo and other coastal Indigenous traditions, I raise my hands in thanks and respect to Phyllis Webstad and her family and colleagues here today. But for Phyllis, for telling her truth, her story about having her new orange shirt taken away, never to be returned, when she first entered the St. Joseph Mission Residential School at the age of 6. Phyllis Webstad courageously told this story and has continued to tell this and other stories about the injustice that Indigenous children and their families experienced during the Indian residential school era that has spanned well over 100 years. The Orange Shirt Day movement began in 2013 and has become stronger every year because of individual and collective efforts. I have observed K-12 schools in BC and across Canada. They were among the first to take on the action of wearing orange shirts and spreading the important message that every child matters. My Indigenous grandchildren, ages 6 and 8, as elementary school children, know the story of the orange shirt. And they know the devastating impact of Indian residential schools on generations of children and their families. Their great-grandmother, my mother, is a survivor of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Recently, my 6-year-old granddaughter said that she was glad that her great-grandmother made it, so that she and her brother could live their lives today. My granddaughter and her brother also know that so many Indigenous children did not make it. My grandchildren are proud to be Indigenous, and they have proudly worn their orange shirts to school on September 30th and on many other days as well. They are proud to pass on the message that every child matters. I am also encouraged by the expansion of Orange Shirt Day to colleges and universities, along with the knowledge of and commitment to address the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action. Today's event has provided a reflective moment for me to remember, to assess, and to reinforce the importance of the TRC's calls to action that implicate everyone attending this event today. Because I am an educator, I will share some remarks about the education calls to action that highlight the need to develop curriculum about the history and legacy of residential schools, of treaties, of Aboriginal peoples' historical and contemporary contributions to Canada, and of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as we know, UNDRIP. To make it mandatory for K-12 and post-secondary professional programs to learn about this colonial history, along with the historical and contemporary contributions of Aboriginal people to Canada. To develop students' intercultural understanding, mutual respect, and understandings of human rights and anti-racism. And to engage in research that advances understandings of reconciliation. And there are more implications and calls, but I just highlighted those for today. The TRC's calls to action emphasize approaches for truth and reconciliation to take place. Many of these calls have been worked on, some for decades. Much of the TRC's recommendations echo those of past commissions and research reports. For decades, Indigenous people in many different sectors have worked hard to overcome colonial injustice and intergenerational trauma and effects. In my 45-year career in education, I have been involved in many educational actions related to the TRC recommendations, and much of this work has involved a team effort of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. I am especially grateful to Indigenous elders, cultural knowledge holders, and community leaders who resisted the genocidal attempts of the residential school and other colonial policies and practices, and who were able to maintain their Indigenous languages, teachings, values, and Indigenous knowledge systems so that they could share those with others. They were and continue to be at the forefront of the truth and reconciliation movement as we know it today. I will only share a few of these collective success efforts that have taken place within the UBC Faculty of Education. The UBC's Indigenous Teacher Education Program, called NITEP, has been preparing Indigenous people to be certified teachers for 47 years, and NITEP is still going strong. This program includes Indigenous knowledge and values as a foundation of teacher preparation, and also works in partnership with Indigenous communities, school districts, and other post-secondary institutes to offer much of this program within communities through regional field centers. Many NITEP alumni have become teachers, school leaders, curriculum developers, policymakers, researchers, community-based leaders, faculty, and more. The Faculty of Education has offered many graduate programs that often include Indigenous education and research courses and concentrations. Some Indigenous alumni hold faculty positions, are Canada Research Chairs, and hold Associate Dean and Dean leadership positions. For graduate students engaged in Indigenous research, we established a multidisciplinary, province-wide peer support network called SAGE. Now, there are SAGE cohorts at various universities across Canada. Most of the teacher education programs in BC and Canada now have a mandatory Indigenous education course that all teacher candidates complete, which establishes a beginning, but only a beginning, knowledge base for these future teachers. And any UBC teacher candidate can also enroll in a themed cohort that focuses on Indigenous education to give them even deeper understandings. And our Faculty of Education has established a province-wide Indigenous math education network to mentor and provide sharing and learning opportunities for K-12 teachers to bring community, math, and culture together. In essence, to make math more successful for Indigenous learners. These success examples focus on making systemic change in educational systems. It took many years and many people working together to make these changes happen. However, there are still numerous ongoing challenges, such as many Indigenous students at all levels of education experience forms of anti-Indigenous racism and systemic racism regarding indigeneity. In addition to their normal work responsibilities, Indigenous teachers, faculty, and staff are expected to do the majority of the change work of their non-Indigenous peers and for the educational system. The priorities and needs of Indigenous communities are often not recognized, understood, or addressed in education and research programs. And educational systems may focus on short-term commitments and actions and do not engage in long-term transformative change, which requires long-term commitment and actions. The establishment of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation provides an ongoing opportunity to remember, assess, and reinforce individual and collective actions. For some, the truth and reconciliation journey is just starting, while others have created exciting pathways. Yet, some do not agree with or recognize this colonial legacy of Indian residential schools. We have a lot of work to do in the days ahead to achieve truth and reconciliation, and to make this world a better place so that each child feels and knows that they matter. But we do not have to do this work alone. We are fortunate to have people such as Phyllis Webstad, who has created a strong truth and reconciliation educational pathway. It is now my honor to introduce her. Phyllis Webstad is Northern Secwepemc from the Siswep Hakkatim First Nation of Canoe Creek and Williams Lake. Phyllis, the originator of Orange Shirt Day and founder of the Orange Shirt Society, is a respected author, educator, storyteller, and change maker. In 2017, she received the Distinguished Alumni Award from Thompson Rivers University for her unprecedented impact through the sharing of her Orange Shirt story. In 2018, Phyllis launched her children's book called The Orange Shirt Story to share her story in her own words. This book was on the children's best-selling book list for much of 2018, and Phyllis has published additional books such as Phyllis's Orange Shirt for ages 4 to 8, and recently Beyond the Orange Shirt Story for ages 12 plus. And this last book recounts stories of 6 generations of her family, and she has worked with educators to develop lesson plans for these books. And I know that Phyllis has been traveling across the country from Halifax to Haida Gwaii, sharing her story, sharing the educational resources that have been developed so that people become more aware of the impact of the Indian residential school, to become informed, but to be encouraged to be part of this movement, the Orange Shirt movement, the movement to ensure, that we let children know that they matter. So let's give a warm welcome to Phyllis Webstad.
Xiiem for that introduction, Joanne. Wade Chwchwaidap, Phyllis Webstad Rensquest, Stracham Chatlam Slakwan. What I said is hello to everyone. My name is Phyllis Webstad. I'm from the Canoe Creek Dog Creek First Nation. We are Xiiem, part of the Xiiem Nation in the interior of BC. My 2 communities are about an hour and a half, 2 hours southwest of Williams Lake, and we skirt the Fraser River. I want to first acknowledge members of my family that are here and are in the documentary. First is my mother, Rose Wilson. So if you could just stand and face everyone. My eldest aunt, Teresa Jack, she's in the documentary as well. And my aunt that I lived with from the age of about 9, 10, Agnes Jack. And I really struggled, this was before the Tecumloops 215, with the content that's in this documentary. I went home on the weekend and I really soul-searched. I had a really hard time because I questioned, is the world ready to hear what we have to say and what's in this documentary? And I went back to them and I asked them, is it okay what you said for the world basically to hear? And they said, yes, they're ready. And I asked my chief, who's my second cousin, because I talk about in the documentary about what his mother told him. And I asked him, is that okay to have that in there? And he said, yes, the world needs to know. And you'll see what the scenes in here. So for me, those will be the two hardest. Oh, first, I want to acknowledge the Orange Shirt Society. We, with the Canadian Heritage, did this documentary with Sean Stiller. And I want to acknowledge two of our board of directors here today, Shannon Henderson, so if you can stand up. And Shannon is our vice president, and newly to the board, Mary Gurgis. So Mary, you could... Yeah. That was supposed to be a secret, wasn't it? Yeah, she hasn't been told yet by our president, so nobody say anything. Okay, so I wanted to explain the stick that I'm holding. The St. Joseph Mission Residential School, where 3 generations of my family attended, began their search on August 30th. And we had a COVID-friendly, in the north, we can only have 50 people. And we had a COVID-friendly gathering, and we were given these sticks to carry when we speak, to let people know that the children are being searched for at the St. Joseph Mission as we speak. And so this is to remember them. And I haven't had time to personalize it, but there's a hole up here. I wanted to put a feather or something, and maybe some beads for the children in different colors, and I'll personalize it at some point. Just a little bit about Orange Shirt Day. We chose September because September is the time of the year that the children were taken from their homes and their families. We chose the 30th because we wanted teachers and students time to settle in and to teach the history of residential school. And we chose the 30th as well because we wanted time to plan an event. And Dr. Joanne Archibald talked about it being in the schools, and that's originally what it was for, was in the Caribou Chilcotin for the schools to teach about St. Joseph Mission. And we have a book out called Orange Shirt Day that's also in the library, tells how it went viral. There was a woman who gave out 5,000 little orange 4x6 cards with a Facebook page at the TRC event in Vancouver, and that's how it hit Facebook. And it has a mind of its own right now to be what it is today. And I've always said from the very beginning that Orange Shirt Day is divinely guided. Something else is in charge, because me as a human could not do what is happening today. And more recently, the children are there, the ancestors there behind this. And there's no other explanation, because if I went to try to convince everybody, I don't have the human capability to do that. So it's everyone's story. My story is not unique. There were 150,000 children across Canada taken from their homes and their families. So it's their story as well. And it just fits. And talking about the BC Lions game on Friday, I sometimes wonder, why was I chosen to do this? And running beside George of the BC Lions, running from interview to interview at one end of the BC Lions to the other, it's like, okay, this is why I was chosen. I can do this. And because like my mom or my auntie, they wouldn't be able to run beside George or behind George. So call them the big kahuna of the BC Lions. So yeah, so running from interview to interview, it's like, yeah, I'm old enough. I turned 54 this year, so maybe about another 10 years I could run around. So we'll talk more after the documentary. I don't know if everybody knows, it's like an hour and a half. So I'm just warning you now, and but it'll go by quickly because it's just so captivating, and we'll hear from Sean. And Sean joined our family the past few years down at our fish camp on the Fraser River. And so we'll get to talk more about that later. So without further talking, I will stop so that we can watch the documentary. So Xiiem, thank you.
The majority of the people here in Williams Lake had no idea what was going on in their backyard. The impacts of this St. Joseph's Residential School has been felt from generation to generation to generation, ever since 1891.
I went to St. Joseph's when I had just turned 6. We got stripped. We got put in, I don't know what we got put in, but my orange shirt was taken away. So I wear it today as a symbol of the healing that's taking place.
Something that comes with the Western society and the settlers that arrive here is a fairly stark binary between human and non-human. Humans are the subjects of property, have the capacity to be owners, and everything else is available to be owned.
The salmon is the link between both the spawning grounds and the open ocean, and also provides the link between the families. Residential schools were set up to break the cycle of the family as a unit of socializing, educating, protecting.
The tradition of the Orange T-shirt Day grew out of Phyllis Webstad's personal story and reflections on being a residential school survivor, and it's now used as a day to honor residential school survivors.
We've thrived as Sequebin people due to the salmon in a lot of ways.
Our people have been fishing here forever. I mean, we've lived here for thousands of years. You get to know a place so intimately.
I want to just ask Sean if he's comfortable just to come up and say a few words. We'd really appreciate it. And while Sean's doing that, I'm just going to ask also Phyllis to come up and have a seat, and Joanne to come up to have a seat. And we're going to have some time for some questions and a bit of time for discussion. Thank you. Sean.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, can I take a picture really quick for Instagram? Just. Okay. So I should preface this by saying I'm quite a bit more comfortable behind the camera than I am in front of an audience, so I'll do my best. But Xiiem to UBC for hosting this here and screening the film and having Phyllis and her family here. That's a great privilege. I guess I'll just say Phyllis and I knew each other some years before Canadian Geographic reached out about this film. I was working on a totally different project, and before she became a superstar, she was managing a gas bar in Williams Lake, and she was watching me work and asked me if I wanted to attend her family's fish camp. Thought I might get something out of it, so I attended, and that was where that relationship between the Sequebin and the salmon really solidified in my mind. I began to understand it. And so I had been thinking for years about this relationship and not knowing quite what to do with it. And then Canadian Geographic approached me, not even knowing that we knew each other or that I was Sequebin also. So it was a perfect kind of connection. And then Big Bar landslide happened, and there was yet another fishing moratorium. And so the idea of exploring, I guess, human trauma and non-human trauma that the salmon also have been impacted by colonization in their own way, and that they're bound up culturally with the Secwepemc just felt like a real natural fit and a timely fit. So I guess I just want to say it's been a real privilege, Phyllis, to get to know you and for you to invite me into your life and into your family's life. And I'm really honored to be able to amplify the work that you're doing, because it is very much your work. And yeah, maybe I'll just stop there. So, Xiiem.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you again for your family and for sharing that with us today at UBC. And obviously we're going to be watching it more, and so amazing to see. Well, this is like a beautiful big screen to see it. I much prefer that to seeing it at home in my small sort of TV screen. But the landscape was incredible, and the twinning of the stories. And I want to turn to you, Phyllis, first and just say, when you see that film, I mean, so much tells your story and the story of the fish camp. And were you back there this summer at the fish camp?
No, I wasn't. The river wasn't open until much later on, and we didn't get down there. But after last year, I was thinking that maybe we'll do it every second year. And I just feel like I need to explain that shirt I was wearing at the end about being Bannockslack.
I love that shirt.
I purposely wore that. There's a bit of a story about how I came upon it. And I gave it back after I finished filming that to the person that was wearing it. But there was alcohol and drugs brought into our camp by our family the night before that created chaos for us, and resulting in my mother and I leaving. And so when we came back the next day, people were scattering as we were entering, so we're divided right now, I'm sad to say, in our family because of drugs and alcohol. And so I thought, well, yeah, I'm there to give them a bannock slap if they're still there for doing what they did and drinking the night before. But yeah, so that's what that's about. You can see I'm like, you know. Anyway, so yeah, I've just felt like I needed to explain my shirt.
Well, I did have a bit of a smile when I saw that shirt, but I really appreciate you sharing that story. And also that need, even in your safe place in the camp, to continue to deal with the legacy of issues like drug and alcohol in a community, and also at that sort of sacred place, right? And so, and I'd like to also just ask you, Joanne, just when you're seeing this film for the first time as well, and what do you think when you see this in terms of the powerful education that is there in terms of the salmon and the residential schools, a beautiful kind of juxtaposition of those two critical things? Did it bring you joy to see this? Are you?
Yes, well, joy and sorrow in a way too, because, and I think it really reflects the power of true stories. You know, in that film, we see the true story of Phyllis and your family. We see the true story of what's happening to the salmon. And myself, having, you know, Stalo roots in the Fraser Valley, the Fraser River is so important to us, as are the salmon. And on my mother's side, she's from Chakalip, Lillooet, and so certainly wind-drying salmon is very important to my mother's family. So, you know, bringing the two true stories together in film is very powerful, and it also brings together the land, you know, the beauty of the land, the river, and at the same time thinking about what's causing these problems that I think is very educational for students of all ages to kind of think about why residential schools happened, why, you know, why was there colonial laws and forbidding people to have families stay together, and then thinking about how important the salmon is to Indigenous people and the laws that are there that prevent them, but thinking about, the overfishing, denying of others, commercial fishers, denying Indigenous people. So there's a lot in that film that will be good for raising questions, for thinking about what can we do about it. Each individual, we can do something. So I do raise my hands to Sean, to Phyllis, for bringing those two important stories together.
Thank you. I have a question from the audience for you, Phyllis. And it's a question which is, what are your hopes and dreams for the future of Orange Shirt Day?
Mm-hmm. It's continued to grow and have a life of its own. And at the Orange Shirt Society, we're having our strategic planning in October, and I want to bring Mary and Shannon to the places that you've seen on screen. And in the past 2 months, we've been able to hire 3 full-time staff. When I hired, because I was executive director, but we hired an executive director, and what I told her was, we have money now for you and I for at least 2 years, but be prepared. At some point, we might need to just pack up and go home. And because we're not government funded, we rely on donations and what we can make for me presenting and selling shirts. And I'm not sure what the future holds. I'm 54. I turn pension age in 11 years. And I don't know, maybe by then we'll have offices all across Canada, but maybe we'll be packing up and going home. I don't know. And so I'm not sure, but one thing's for certain, September 30th will always be Orange Shirt Day. It'll always be a day to honor residential school survivors and their families and to remember those that never made it. In as little as 50 some years, there will be no survivors left in Canada. So it'll be a day left to remember us, and I just want to keep doing this for as long as I can, and we are starting an Orange Shirt Society Foundation because we could not get charitable status as a society. The reason given was that our purposes talks about awareness, and we're not education. And then what we do is highly emotive and based on unproven facts. And I still want to talk to, I'll be sitting with the Minister of Canadian Heritage on Orange Shirt Day, and want to talk to him about that letter we got from CRA about our charitable status. And when the 215 were revealed, I wanted to take a copy of that news release and send it with that section to CRA and say, is that enough evidence for you? And so we have a long ways to go. But anyway, we're doing a foundation. It'll be education-based, and the application is just about to go in if it hasn't already.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And it's shocking. I mean, first of all, so much gratitude to you, Phyllis, for how much you've not only given the story of Orange Shirt Day, your story, the film as well, the books, the tours. I mean, it's lovely to see a staff. You deserve to have a staff, probably a staff about 50 or 60, from what I can see from the tours. And it's wonderful to have some of your staff with us today. Is it okay if I ask them to stand up just to get recognized as well?
They aren't staff, they're board of directors for the Orange Shirt Society. So Shannon and Mary, where's Mary? I think she's gone. Oh, you're right there. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think Shannon, you're on the foundation as well? Yes. Yeah.
And I think, I know for UBC, the Orange Shirt Day shirts we have, which is, again, the orange. What I love is also how the orange shirts allow for so many designs from local First Nations of the territories. The orange shirts for UBC were designed by Elliot Hill-White, who is from Sinamok, Inuktitut, and with ties to Musqueam. And all the proceeds of the sale of the orange shirts here go to the Indian Residential School Survivor Society and the Orange Shirt Society. So thank you. But in terms of the foundation, we'll support you, of course, to build the foundation because it's such a significant work. And one of the other questions that came in from the audience was about your grandson. I think it's your grandson. We saw him in the film with your son. And the question was, what do you learn from your grandchildren? What are you learning about this from your grandchildren and the kind of gift you've given?
What I'm learning from my grandchildren is how to say I love you. That's hard. And to give hugs. My 5-year-old grandson, just this past summer, he's standing there. There's myself, my mom, his other grandmother, and he's standing there like this. And he's like, you know what, guys? I just love all of you. And then he's wanting to give hugs. And I'm like, who's this creature? What is he talking about? But it's like, okay, no, I need to. But I found myself retreating. But he was just 5 years old, full of love, and wanted all of his everybody to know. And he was hugging and just saying, I love you, Grandma Elsie, I love you. And it's like, that's what I felt like, but I was like, okay, you can breathe, you can do this. And so that's huge for me, is to, because it wasn't, I don't know, expressed in the family. When I remember getting a hug from Agnes when I was probably 14 years old. And that was my first memory of a first hug. And so that's the biggest thing for me with my grandchildren. They're teaching me that.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Phyllis. I want to just ask one of the questions that's come from the audience to you, Professor Archibald, and that it's something we also grapple with every single day, which is how to protect the stories of the survivors, the testimonies of the survivors, without re-traumatizing. How do we share that without re-traumatizing all of us as Indigenous people? What is important to do? What's the ingredients that makes it possible to do that?
Well, I've learned from my Stalo elders over the years, who I also went to their fish camp, as an adult though, and appreciated being with them, learning from them, listening to their stories. And I also learned from another elder, the late Chief Simon Baker Kotlacha, and he said one time, we have to learn to listen with our 3 ears. Of course, the 2 that we hear with, but he also said the one in our heart. And we need to bring that listening, with our heart, with what we hear, with what we feel together. And I think that was important teaching for me. So I learned to listen with those 3 and more ears to people's stories, especially the heartfelt, the stories about residential school experience over the years. And to be open to then, for me, trying to figure out what that means. What does it mean when people tell their stories? What am I to learn from their story? And what can I do so that, in a way, that history does not happen again in a different form? And I also learned to appreciate the resilience and the strength when people tell their residential school survivor stories and any difficult stories about the impact of colonization. And to appreciate that resilience, the strength that an individual has, and then to take that responsibility to do something. You have to listen, but do something. And that's what I think part of the TRC calls to action, that each one of us can do something when we hear those stories. So we have to ask ourselves, how can we do it in a way that respects the people's stories, yet at the same time, to do something to make things better. When I think of my grandchildren, that's in their language, make things better, that we can make it in a way to be who we are and to be strong Indigenous people. So that, that's what I think about in that relation to that question.
Thank you so much. Another question, and Phyllis, I'm going to direct this one to you. It's really, it's about the fish and fishing, and about, what can we do today? This is from the audience. What can we do today to protect the future of salmon?
I often think about that, and I wish I knew the magic answer, but one of the things that I think about every time I take a shower is the shampoos and all of the cleaning products that are going down the drain and ending up in the Fraser River. And it's at the thought stage right now, but that's definitely like a look into more, I guess, environmentally friendly ways of cleaning our bodies. And so that like whenever I see in Walmart all the dials and all the this and that, it's like all of that is going to be in the water. And that's what I think of when I look at it. So I've stopped buying that, and I've been using bar soap. It's a small thing, but like natural bar soap. And I know that's my contribution. I don't know what else to do. Like if somebody has a magical solution, like let us know if we can do it. But it's like the agriculture, like Bev Sellers said, along the river, it's all being dumped into the river. And like Dog Creek that flows through our village is, there used to be a lot of trees there, and now they're dying because of all of the waste from the animals going into the creek, which flows directly into the Fraser. So I don't know, I don't have any magical solutions.
I think that those solutions about your personal choices are so significant. And then there's also the pretty strong message in the film, which is about returning decisions for the fish to community leadership. I saw in the film those meetings, right? There's urgent meetings about the allocation, and will we cancel the fishery, and obviously with DFO on the other end, right? Which are probably DFO in, I don't know, maybe they're in Williams Lake, maybe they're in Prince George, maybe they're in Vancouver. But you really get that strong message from the film about returning decision-making to those who are stewards of the Fraser. Do you feel that when you see that too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are a dip net fishery by choice. It's been like that since I can remember. We do not use gill nets by the decision was made like before my time, but gill nets are allowed, like just not far from where the filming was, but very few people do use the gill nets, and I'm not sure about like all of the rules on the Fraser, like with the Stolo, the different rules. I know there's people in the know that make decisions, and how the commercial fishery fits in, and how the recreational and everything fits in. And I leave that to the people who's in the know about that sort of thing.
And I have an interesting question, which it's one of those how do you feel questions, which I know you said in the film, or little kids ask the how do you feel questions all the time. Well, there's probably some sort of older kids here that ask it too. I thought this was a pretty great question though, which is how do you feel now when you put on your orange shirt?
Mm-hmm. I have a closet full of orange shirts. And I found this one in the closet. I thought it would be fitting to come and wear this today. I did bring other clothing because at the end of the day, when I'm done, I'll go and change and to just kind of like decompress and like, whew, okay, I can just not think about that anymore. And especially in September, but I know that like in Victoria, the two people that organize in Victoria, they challenge themselves and others to wear orange every day in September. And I did it for a couple of years, and by the 30th, like I just wanted nothing to do with an orange shirt on October 1st. But and it makes sense because they said the kids didn't have a choice. And it's kind of feeling what the children did by just wearing orange. Oh, wear it again today? Okay. And then the kids that didn't come home. So they challenge themselves, and they too say October 1st. It's like they all get washed and get put in the closet for a few days. But really, I don't wear orange unless I'm doing something to do with Orange Shirt Day. It's not my favorite color.
Well, thank you so much for that. And certainly one thing that I think has emboldened many Indigenous people and created a sense of support was after Kamloops, shared the findings about the missing children, the 215 children. I think the fact that non-Indigenous people in Kamloops all through BC started just spontaneously in May to wear orange. So it kind of take a little bit of the burden off to have to be, the Orange Shirt Society, Phyllis, and the Orange Shirt, and you can see it other places. Does that feel kind of nice to feel like it's an acknowledgement, it's a recognition, and while we can't always share with each other what's happening in our minds and our hearts, we can always be transparent, but by wearing the orange, especially since May in British Columbia, and like you've just been at the BC Lions as well, British Columbians want to wear orange, which is pretty special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And does it give you some comfort when you go back to Williams Lake? Can you see everybody wearing orange?
Mm-hmm. They've lined the streets with. They've made street signs in Williams Lake all along the main street on Oliver. But when I seen people wearing orange, like after the 215 and also for Canada Day, and instead of red and white, wear orange, and it is a weight off of my shoulders, because it traveling and telling my story, and with the orange shirt, it did feel like a weight was lifted, and we have three purposes for this society, and they just happened in leaps and bounds all of a sudden. And I know at the board table, the question is, okay, well, what do we do now? Kind of like everybody's doing what we wanted them to do, and it happened so fast, so what now? And so we're looking at the foundation route, and we're having strategic planning and to kind of go, like, figure out where we go now. And in the early, probably 2014, maybe 2015, I was in Victoria, and we incorporated as a society in 2015. We didn't open our office in Williams Lake till 2019, but I was in Victoria speaking, and it was me. I showed up at the school, and I got a call from media on my phone, and it's I answered, and they said, we'd like to speak to Phyllis Webstad, and if not, could you put me through to your French department in your Winnipeg office? And I'm like, okay, can you hold a moment? Put it on my other ear. Phyllis Webstad here.
Good job.
Gotta have some fun. And but yeah, we have yet to have a French department, but it's needed. And who knows, maybe we will have offices across Canada, I don't know. We're developing more speakers. We have Deborah Johnson from Alkali Lake, or Esquette. She's speaking all this week in the Lower Mainland. We have a video for her. We have a prop behind her with Orange Shirt Society information, and then she gets to tell her own story. And my Aunt Agnes is talking about, she wants to be a motivational speaker and let others know her healing journey, about how she's been able to make sense of, I guess, our history and what her experience is, and encourage how others can heal, and what worked for her. So we might talk to her about that, about being a motivational speaker.
Well, thank you for that, and I do want to acknowledge that you did come today with your mom Rose and your aunts Agnes and Teresa. It's lovely. It was lovely to see them in the film, now that they're film stars, but it was wonderful to have them here too. I want to just close by saying how much I'd like to say thank you to all the presenters and the film, and of course having Sean family present today. And just as we close the event, you're going to hear some music, and this is music that's a new music from Ailelam, which is the Good Sisters from Stinemuk. You may have seen they recently had some of their fashion in Paris Fashion Week, including an incredible gown dedicated to the missing children. This is a new song that they've released. I don't think it's totally out yet until this week, but it's a beautiful song, and it's just to ground us as we sort of make our way back into the day. And again, just a song, it's called Homecoming, and it's about gratitude as well. And I'm going to give the last word to you, Phyllis. So again, much gratitude in your journey. So thank you for coming to UBC. And the last word's really to you. Thank you.
When's lunch? Yeah, it's hard to, this time of the year, to find food and to go to the bathroom. So it's a challenge. And I believe it's the children at Kamloops that, again, the ancestors that are to credit for National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. C5 was stuck in the House of Commons since the end of November. And I was dreading going a third round because it was Bill C369, then C5, and appearing before them twice, and letter writing, and everybody was across Canada was lobbying like as much as we could to get it passed, but it was stuck there since the end of November. May 27th, the Gukbi Kazmir talked or revealed about the 215 children. The morning after, Canadian Heritage called me and said that C5 would be going through the House of Commons, and because I had been in contact with them, I heard from the Senate as well. So within a week, C5 had received royal assent, and when it did, I got a text from my contact in the House or in the Senate, and I was so tired, I just sat there because I needed a haircut, and I had canceled all my appointments, my self-care to be in Kamloops, and I had just finished phoning everybody. It was 7-something at night, trying to get a haircut in Kamloops, and when I got the text, it's like, I couldn't find a haircut. Like, that was my response to it. It was like, I was just so tired. It's like the whole week was a blur, and but again, the children, and like before that, I thought, if we have to go a third round, if I have to appear before those politicians again, I'm not going to say what I've said the last 2 times. I'm just going to give them shit. Like, because and what I wanted to tell them was, how hard is it to do what's right? Like, if I had to sit there with them a third time, yeah. Anyway, so thankful it's this year's the first National National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, the implementation of TRC number 80. So, Xiiem, everybody, for being here and for coming out.